Welcome to the Center for Baptist Leadership Podcast, hosted by William Wolfe. Our mission is to cultivate courageous and biblical Baptist leadership for the 21st century. We aim to revitalize the Southern Baptist Convention from within, defend it from those who seek its destruction, and serve as a better Baptist voice in the public square.
Welcome back to the Center for Baptist Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Executive Director William Wolfe. We are joined today by a presidential candidate for the Southern Baptist Convention, Dr. David Allen. Dr. Allen, thank you for being with us here today.
Well, thank you, William, for the invitation and the opportunity to be a part of this discussion.
Yeah, we're really pleased to have you on. We had a chance to have another candidate on recently, Dr. Jared Moore, and we want to have you on as well to make sure that our listeners and any Southern Baptists who hear this get a chance to hear why you're running, who you are, and what you care about within the Southern Baptist Convention. If you would be willing to, please just introduce yourself to our listeners and tell us a little bit about your history as a Southern Baptist.
Well, I'd be very happy to do that. I was born and raised in Rome, Georgia, and came to know the Lord when I was 9 years of age, and grew up there in a Southern Baptist church, West Rome Baptist Church. And God called me to preach when I was 16 years old. I was a junior in high school playing baseball, and the Lord made it very clear to me that He wanted me to preach His word. And I assumed at the time that would just mean being in the pastorate all of my life. And I was in the pastorate for many years, 21 years as a senior pastor of two churches. And then I've done 14 interim pastorates in 13 different churches. And so I have lots of pastoral experience, but I've also had a bit of academic experience. I taught adjunctively first at the Crystal College in Dallas, Texas, and then I taught there full-time for 6 years. And then after that, I was 18 years at Southwestern Theological Seminary, Baptist Seminary there. And now the last 2 years at Mid-America Baptist Seminary. And in addition to that, I've had a lot of convention experience. I have served as on the board of trustees of one institution for 12 years. 3 of those 12, the last 3 were in a role as an officer, the final year chairman of the board of trustees there. And I've served not only in that capacity at the national level, others as well. I was on the resolutions committee many years ago of the SBC and some other service there. And then at the conventions, at the state convention level, I've been very involved through the years at the Southern Baptist of Texas Convention. And then the associational level, when I was a pastor in my first church, I was heavily involved in our associational work. And so Southern Baptists have been my life. I owe them so very much. I was trained at a Southern Baptist institution, saved, of course, in a Southern Baptist church. My mother worked, as an administrative assistant in a Southern Baptist church on staff for 25 years. My son was an IMB missionary to Egypt for a few years. And so I'm Southern Baptist through and through from the very beginning.
Well, that's fantastic for your service and for your love for the Lord and for these people in particular, Southern Baptists. You know, there's sometimes in our current media climate, Southern Baptists get the short end of the stick from a lot of folks. But as you know, there are people who do love the Lord, love others, and deserve to be loved well in return. And so we thank you for your care for them. And so after all these years of service, so you're from Georgia originally, and
right.
Texas is home now for you.
Correct.
And you've got this wonderful ministry, PreachingCoach. Is that the name of it?
Yes, correct.
PreachingCoach, where you're helping out pastors, to become better preachers and expositors of God's word. And you decided to jump into the fray to run for SBC president. Now, what compelled you to do that?
Well, you remember the old saying, fools rush in where angels fear to tread. And that's maybe what I perhaps might be descriptive of me here. But I'll tell you how and why that happened. Um, 9 months ago, people began to contact me and ask me, David, would you consider running for presidency of the SBC? And I would tell them, absolutely not. And no, I just don't feel like the Lord wants me to do that. But they kept coming, and different people kept contacting me. I had people that I didn't even know, but who knew of me through my preaching or teaching or my writing. And they said, Dr. Allen, look, I know you don't know me, but I've been praying and I just feel led to contact you and ask you to run. Well, after a while, I began to think, well, now, Lord, am I missing something here? And so I began to think about it and pray about it. And one day I brought this subject up with my wife, Kate, and I told her people were contacting me and, asking me to put my name in the hat, so to speak. And I was just informing her that had been happening. And her response was 2 words: absolutely not. She's very savvy, and she knows that to enter into something like that is to paint a target on your back. And but interestingly, about 4 weeks later, she came to me, and we weren't even talking about it. And she said, David, if God tells you to run, I'm behind you 110%. And we began to talk and pray about it, and we just felt led. I need to do this. And so based upon what I considered to be the leadership of the Lord, based upon counsel with my wife and her agreement, we agreed together in prayer and discussion, based upon the encouragement of many other people, based upon what I consider to be the needs of our SBC at this point. The Southern Baptist Convention is in trouble. We're facing some difficult problems, some difficult days. There are many wonderful things about the SBC, but there are a number of issues that we are facing. And based on the fact that I owe the SBC so very much and want to contribute to that if there's any way that I can, I finally concluded that God was in it. And so I allowed my name to be placed in nomination, and Danny Forshee, who is a pastor here in Texas, is scheduled or planning to nominate me officially at the Southern Baptist Convention. So I guess that's the short word and the short story of how I came to be involved in this.
Yeah, well, it reminds me a little bit of some of the stories you read during the first conservative resurgence, when you had men like Adrian Rogers, who people were asking to run, and his wife did not want him to run, did not want him to be nominated. And I think it was one of the major inflection point conventions. It was the night before that his wife finally came to him and said, all right, if the Lord's going to have you do it, I'm not going to stop you.
Yeah. I think that story is correct. I believe that's the way that happened.
Yeah. Well, so you said that the Southern Baptist Convention is in trouble. So, your people have reached out to you. They've asked you to run. You've prayed about it, talked to your wife, and you're in. And I think when you announced, there certainly weren't 6 candidates at that point in time, but we do have 6 candidates now. But I think that many people share that assessment of yours, which is something's not quite right with the Southern Baptist Convention. Our direction isn't what it should be. Some people use the word drift. I've seen some new language that's starting to be used, which is that the Southern Baptist Convention is being steered, as in it's not just accidentally happening, but there perhaps are some forces and some actors who are moving us in a certain direction, as opposed to just it's not just entropy. It's not just the law of decline here. It's an intentional movement. But I do think that a lot of people recognize that things aren't right. As you said, the Southern Baptist Convention is in trouble. And so what are some of the top issues that you want to see addressed were you to become the Southern Baptist Convention president?
Well, let me answer that by first stating the factors that I think indicate that we are in trouble.
Okay.
And I think there are 3 of those that are measurable. Number 1 is the drop in actual number of people that are in the Southern Baptist Convention. We are on basically a 20-year downward trend of people in terms of membership. So we're losing ground from that standpoint. Number two, when it comes to baptisms, we are also on essentially a 20-year decline in numbers of baptisms every year in the Southern Baptist Convention. When you look at the per capita baptisms per numbers of churches that we have and numbers of people membership and average church attendance, 20 years ago, there was that was at a certain number. 10 years ago, it was decreased. And now today it's decreased again. There's a 20-year decline relative to baptisms. Number three, there is a decline in cooperative program giving. And obviously giving is in any local church, giving is tied to attendance. Generally, if your attendance is higher, your giving is higher. And so we're seeing a decline in cooperative program giving. In fact, over the last 10 years, the Book of Reports of the Southern Baptist Convention makes clear that we have lost $30 million. We're $30 million less in giving now than we were 10 years ago. There's a serious decline. And when you factor in inflation as well, the amount of money that is available to do ministry, it's an even greater decline. So these are very serious things. And those are signs that something is wrong in the convention. Now, I don't think there's any one factor, William, that's causing those issues of decline. I think there are probably a number of factors that play into it, some of which would be beyond our control by one standpoint. Factors of the nature of our culture, the growing hostility to true Christianity in America, and all of these kinds of things. I think that's an issue that's problematic. But I think there are some specific issues that are hindering us and that have created a loss of trust among some of our people. And so I'm going to mention this first issue, which I consider to be the issue of transparency. I do believe that as I travel and preach around the convention, and I preach in all kinds of churches. I preach in small churches that run 50 and 100 people. I preached yesterday at First Baptist Church, Dallas. I preach in large churches and small churches and medium-sized churches. And I hear, generally speaking, the same thing over the last several years. Pastors are telling me they are concerned with the lack of transparency from some of our Southern Baptist leadership. And that transparency is twofold. It's a financial transparency, but it's also a transparency of what are we doing? What exactly are you guys doing? Well, we don't want to tell you. And so, that has created a loss of trust. That lack of trust, that lack of transparency creates a loss of trust. That loss of trust creates a reduction in people's giving to what they give through the cooperative program. Many churches are reducing their giving. That's a serious problem. And that obviously reduces ministry capability for the convention as a whole. I think that's a serious issue in the convention that does need to be addressed. I think another issue is an issue that the Law Sanchez Amendment has brought to the forefront, and that is who is a pastor and who can be a pastor. And clearly, Scripture is clear on that, and so is our doctrinal statement, the Baptist Faith and Message, indicates that the role of pastor, elder, or overseer, three terms in the Greek New Testament that are used interchangeably, that role is reserved for men. In other words, whatever service of leadership that women have on local church staffs, they should not be considered a pastor. And no woman should be considered as the senior pastor of a local church or the preaching pastor of the church, or should have the title or the role of a pastor. And the law amendment speaks to that. Well, obviously, some in our convention have deviated from Scripture on that. It becomes very clear by their words, as well as by their action. And so I think this is a very crucial issue. In fact, I think it's a watershed issue for us at this point. And my prayer is the law amendment will pass. I'm certainly and strongly in favor of that, and I have written about that. I placed a number of documents on my personal website, drdavidallen.org, that people can read about my views on the law amendment, my views on sexual abuse, etc. So I think the role of the office and role of pastor, there's a debate going on in our convention right now that needs to be addressed, and that's an issue. Number three, the concept or the issue of sexual abuse has been placed on the front burner over the last 5 years in Southern Baptist life. And obviously, sexual abuse is evil. Sexual abuse is a crime. Sexual abuse is a great egregious sin, and it needs to be addressed. But some in our midst have tried to elevate or escalate the concept of sexual abuse to a crisis level, to say that the Southern Baptist Convention is shot through with sexual abuse. I do not believe that. I do not think the evidence supports that. Is sexual abuse a problem? Yes. Should it be addressed? Yes. Is it a crisis? No. It is not a crisis. The definition of crisis precludes saying that sexual abuse is a crisis. Now, that doesn't mean that it should be ignored. Absolutely not. We do need to address it. But the way we address it is the issue of debate. There are some who want to address it and who I think have made decisions in the past that have been very hurtful to the SBC. And to how we can address sexual abuse, the issue of sexual abuse. So that is an issue where we stand. Those are just three right off the bat that I can mention. There are others as well, but certainly those three are pretty critical.
Those are very important, and you're absolutely right, particularly to that very first one on the transparency issue. And with the lack of transparency comes a lack of trust. With the lack of trust comes a shrinking cooperation. You can't cooperate if you don't trust each other. And that actually, in some ways, is a banner that hangs over all three of those issues, because we have a lack of transparency on what our convention really thinks and wants to do about the growing number of women pastors. We're sort of told by some folks that if we disfellowshipped 2 churches last year, Saddleback and Fern Creek, that we're handling this problem. And yet, as you mentioned, there are many other churches by their own words and actions that are making it clear they're right in line with Saddleback and Fern Creek in our convention as well. And so it just, you make it clear you support the law amendment. Are you in favor of this other amendment that's being led by Pastor Rhett Burns from Travelers Rest, South Carolina, to secure more financial transparency from the entities to the convention churches?
Absolutely, I'm in favor of that. I think that needs to happen. I think that can happen without in any way hindering the work of our various entities and agencies. I don't see any reason why we can't have the financial transparency that many in the convention are asking for, but in some cases are not receiving. There should be pure financial transparency because of the nature of the convention. The agencies and entities of the SBC are owned and operated and therefore accountable to Southern Baptists. We're the ones paying the bills. We're the ones paying the salaries. We're the ones giving the money through the cooperative program for all of the ministries of the various agencies and entities. Therefore, just by obvious, it seems to me it ought to be obvious that there's a level of accountability to the convention. Now, I know we can't tell everybody everything, and I don't expect that. There are some things that need to remain behind closed doors, and you can't, total transparency is not possible, nor is it wise. But more transparency is definitely necessary in our convention, and I absolutely do support that particular motion that we have financial transparency, and even beyond financial, that we actually have more transparency voluntarily by our agency heads and entity heads and their boards of trustees. I think that can easily happen. It's just a matter of doing it. You know, I've used this illustration before, William, and I'll use it again. In my first church, in my first month as pastor in 1982, February of 1982, I was my first pastorate, and an old deacon came to me and he said, David, Pastor, let me tell you something. He said, what people are not up on, they're down on.
Hmm.
And he said, you will be wise in your pastorate to make good communication a priority. He said, people need to know, and they'll be supportive if they know. You must have good communication. And he said that, remember the old saying among Baptists, trust the Lord and tell the people.
Mm.
And so, I did not always live by that, and I regret it. But I learned that lesson early on. And for the most part, that's how I've tried to operate my ministry. Now, I've had some times where I wish I had done better in that, but trust the Lord and tell the people needs to become the watchword of all entities and agencies of our and boards of trustees of our Southern Baptist Convention. I see no reason why that can't be done. In fact, when people resist that, I immediately wonder, why are you resisting that?
Mm-hmm.
You agree with our structure that we are a bottom-up structure. We're not a top-down structure in the Southern Baptist Convention. You agree with the autonomy of the local church, but yet accountability of the agencies and entities to the people who pay the bills. Why would you not be willing to give them the information they're requesting?
Mm.
And I cannot think of a very good reason why not to do that.
Well, that's very well said. And so if you were to become the next president of the Southern Baptist Convention, how do you envision leading our convention in such a way as to tell the people more and to address some of these issues? Obviously, as many people know, one of the main things that the SBC president does is makes critical appointments to committees,
Right.
the committee on committees, the committee on nominations, and that's what gets us trustees. And, I think a lot of people are beginning to realize that we might have some issues with how our trustee boards are functioning. The very first podcast that I did with Center for Baptist Leadership was with John Whitehead, and he spoke in depth about some of the things that were happening with the ERLC trustees, particularly during Russell Moore's departure. And I know for a lot of people that was very eye-opening, and that hurt their trust, particularly in how those trustee boards are functioning. So how can you address this if you become the next president?
Well, the president of Southern Baptist Convention has some authority or some power, but his power is actually pretty limited when you think about it. As you mentioned, he does appoint the committee on committees, and that's a very important role that he fills, and it is a role of influence. And so I would, and I've already made this statement clear, this is in my document, by the way, called the Southern Baptist Convention Praise, Problems, and Promise, that you can, people can download and read on my website, drdavidallen.org. And I would encourage them to do that, because I state at the very end of that document, here is what I will do toward that end if I am elected. And to reiterate what I have said and what I've written in that document, I will only appoint men and women to the Committee on Committees who will assure me and all Southern Baptists that they will only nominate men and women to any boards of our boards of trustees of our entities and agencies who will be totally committed to truth, trust, and transparency. If you do not assure me that you will do that, I will not appoint you to the Committee on Committees. So I will make that statement as clear as I know how. That is going to be a major issue for me. People have got to be committed to truth, trust, and transparency. Those are only the people that I will appoint to the Committee on Committees, which I then hope they will, and I will charge them. I will say to them, now look, as president of the convention and appointing you to this committee, my expectation is you do the same with those names that you're going to recommend for the Committee on Nominations, and the same for them as they recommend those names that go to the convention to be voted on to serve on boards of trustees. That is paramount for me. That is crucial. And that is my pledge that I have made uh, there will only be people put on my committees who are committed to truth, trust, and transparency.
Well, that's excellent. I think that's very well said. Well, I want to hone in on that truth point, right? Because when we think about truth, obviously, I know you mean biblical truth, sound doctrine, commitment to the Baptist faith and message 2000,
right.
Unreservedly, not with cross fingers or asterisks next to this point or that point. And so, one of the things that when we think about the Southern Baptist Convention and its culture and the concerns, I know that for many years now, really over the last 6 to 10 years, there's been growing concern with what people could call sort of the infiltration of wokeness into the Southern Baptist Convention, of a liberal drift, both theologically and culturally. And you can go all the way back to Resolution 9 and in 2019, and then the way that kind of led to one of the biggest conventions we've ever had in 2021 recently, and some contentious issues there. And so, and I hear that from a lot of folks that I talk to, and I'm not traveling as much as you are, but I'm in touch with a lot of Southern Baptists. Was doing a lot of travel last fall as we were building the Center for Baptist Leadership. And I get the sense that a lot of people feel like this issue isn't quite over yet, that the way that the culture has infiltrated the Southern Baptist Convention, whether it's on racial issues or sexual compromise issues or other things, really, where we're trying to change our doctrine to appeal to the world, that we still have some work to do on that. Now, I've heard some other leaders say that they actually don't think this is a big deal. There's no one woke in the Southern Baptist Convention. So I think our listeners would be interested to hear your take on that. It's not, there's not an action item the same way we have with the financial transparency push or the Mike Law Amendment, though some people could argue that egalitarianism is sort of a form of wokeness, if you use that word. But what do you think is the sort of state of play when it comes to the Southern Baptist Convention and its position versus these detrimental and unbiblical ideologies that are so pervasive in our culture? Have some of them still come in and maybe need to be pushed back out? Where do we stand on that?
Well, I think there are two extremes on that people have gone to in an effort to describe where Southern Baptists are. Mm-hmm. Extreme number one is to say the Southern Baptist Convention has gone woke. Mm-hmm. And I see that kind of statement occasionally. People will say the convention has gone woke. Well, that's just a false statement. That would mean you're saying everybody in the convention has gone woke. Well, that's false. That's certainly not the case. That is an extreme. That's at least an ill-advised way of expressing the issue. The other extreme, the other pendulum swing, is to the opposite end and say, that the Southern Baptist Convention has no issues of wokeness at all. We're not woke. Nobody in the convention is. Nobody's offbeat on that, or nobody's caving to the culture. That's an extreme, because it would appear to be that there are some incidences where that is not the case, where we do have some problem in that area. Now, just like the sexual abuse issue, I do not think the issue of wokeness is a crisis in the SBC. I think that is language. It's not a crisis. It's not an epidemic. That's not the kind of language that needs to be used to describe the issue. However, the Southern Baptist Convention has always had to fight the encroachment of cultural mores into our churches and into our entities. And there's an obvious evidence of that. That's the reason why we had to have a conservative resurgence in the first place. Mm-hmm. Formally beginning in 1979, but it began actually before that. But the convention was clearly drifting in those years. And as you said a moment ago, some people are saying, well, it's not drifting, it's being steered. Well, both were true in 1979. And so the culture, with some people, with some of our leaders, there was a drift, whether it was a drift or whether it was steered, that caused grassroots Southern Baptists to rise up and say, enough. We're going to have to make a change. There's a problem here. In those days, that problem was particularly exhibited in our seminaries and some of the kinds of things that were being taught in our seminaries. There's plenty of evidence for that. No one can really factually dispute that. There are people today, I think, who want to make the case that the conservative resurgence was not necessary. I think that's grossly mistaken. I was there. I was a student at a seminary in 1979 when the conservative resurgence began. I know some of the stuff I was taught, and I know some of it was contrary to Scripture, and some of it was culturally influenced. And if that can happen then, there's no reason to argue it can't happen now. Mm. And I think to some degree with some people that has happened and is happening. And so I think there is a legitimate concern in some ways, although, and this is just a personal opinion and my own impression, but I think the landslide of focus on what has come to be called wokeness, that was becoming big 10 years ago, frankly, in our country, as well as in our convention, I think that is waning. I certainly hope that is the case. Now, should we be always and ever vigilant about biblical justice? Yes, absolutely. Never should we compromise on any aspect of biblical justice, whether it deals with sexual abuse, racism, or anything else. We must affirm and constantly promote biblical justice. We must be ever vigilant about that. But that doesn't mean that we accept the world's ways of solving issues of justice. And I'm afraid that occasionally some of our people, maybe some in our seminaries and maybe some pastors, have yielded too much ground to the culture on some of those issues. And so this would be my way of trying to explain where I would stand and how I would view this, William, and I hope it's helpful, or I hope it's clear that these, when we are dealing with issues that are impinging upon biblical fidelity, and number two, that impinge on wisdom in handling a situation, we need to be discerning how we respond to that.
Yeah, no, that is well said. It was in a recent interview I did with Dr. Willie Rice about his run for SBC president and how that led to a pretty major perspective shift. He made an interesting point. He said that there has been a lot more that's been brought into the agenda of the sexual abuse reforms than what was initially said. It wasn't just about helping churches. It wasn't just about preventing abuse. There was a lot more to it. And he said that one of those things that he thinks was a lot more to it was really it's been used as a vehicle to undo the conservative resurgence in many ways in the Southern Baptist Convention. And he finished that time saying that he did not used to think we needed sort of a second conservative renewal movement or conservative resurgence, whatever you want to call it. And I have my own sort of, I'm never quite sure what to call it myself, quite frankly. Do we want to call it a second conservative resurgence or what? But I agree with him, and I'd be interested in your take on that. And really just as somebody who's been in the SBC for so long, what would you say we need now, and how would you describe it in terms of a more particular conservative renewal movement in the Southern Baptist Convention to contend for the faith once for all delivered to the saints in this generation? We can't just coast, right? As he said, Jimmy Draper told him, you don't drift anywhere worth going, right? And that's the only dead fish drift with the stream. Right. So how would you describe that? What do you think is needed in the Southern Baptist Convention right now for this moment in this generation?
Well, I think we do need something of a bit of a course correction. I would use that terminology.
Course correction.
I think that's a legitimate terminology for where we are. Some people would like to use the word reset. We need a reset. That's a political term that's often used. And by the way, course correction and reset doesn't mean that you're doing a 180. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean that everything is wrong. It doesn't mean that everything is bad, but it just means that deviation here or there can occur, and we need a course correction. Let me illustrate it this way. I was amazed one time a few years back in reading an article written by one of the NASA scientists, and he said that in all of the Apollo moon missions, He said the Apollo spacecraft was off course 90% of the time. And I was astounded by that. And then he went on to explain, because the normal question is, wow, well, if we're off course 90% of the time between Earth and the moon, how in the world did we ever land on the moon? And the answer is mission control would radio to the lunar module, you are off course 0.05 degrees, course correct accordingly. And the lunar module would, of course, listen and do what mission control said to do. And so even though they were technically off course a little bit, 90% of the time, they made it to the moon because they listened to mission control. Southern Baptists have got to always stay plugged in and listening to mission control. Mission control is God and his word. Mission control is then our confessional statement. Now, ultimately, mission control is God and his word. That's our final authority. But our confessional statement means something. Words mean something. And so I think that there is evidence that I would agree with Willie Rice on this. There is evidence that something is amiss, that some things are amiss. We have much that we can thank God for. But there are also just some things that I think need to be addressed, and we need a bit of course correction on. And that's what I would hope to contribute to accomplishing as president of the SBC. No one person is going to fully change what needs to happen in the SBC. It'll be a team effort. One president can't change it, right? And one person can't change it. But if enough people see some issues that do need to be changed, issues related to our doctrinal statement, issues related to sexual conduct, issues related to how sexual abuse can be biblically and wisely addressed, some of these corrections, I think, need to be made. For example, I don't want to be too specific, but I don't mind being a little bit specific. I do think some of our leaders, when it comes to the issue of sexual abuse, have made mistakes. And I think we made two mistakes that have become very costly. One mistake is the waiving of attorney-client privilege in the process of addressing sexual abuse. Now, granted, that was a part of the motion that came to the floor of the SBC several years back to address the issue, but I think our members had no clue what that would entail. And they voted their heart. They wanted to see sexual abuse addressed, but included in that was the motion to waive attorney-client privilege. That was, in my opinion, a mistake. And it's a very costly mistake because it has opened the door to lawsuits. It has cost us from the standpoint of our insurance coverage. We still have insurance coverage, but most of Southern Baptists are not aware that coverage has been adjusted because of that decision. And we don't have the sweetheart deal of coverage in litigation that we used to have. And these are the kinds of things that are happening because of decisions that I think were unwisely made. Also, the decision to indemnify. This was a decision made at the recommendation of the Sexual Abuse Task Force, and the executive committee followed through to indemnify Guidepost Solutions. That was a mistake because indemnifying them means that if they get sued for mishandling issues of sexual abuse and trying to help us, we have to pay the litigation. We have to pay their costs. And that's exactly what's happening right now because Guidepost Solutions have made some errors, misjudgments in their report and how they've reported it, and they're being sued by Southern Baptists. And the payment, the cost of those lawsuits is being borne by all the rest of Southern Baptists. Cooperative program mission money is primarily going to pay for that kind of litigation. And that is the part of what opened that door was, in my opinion, the very foolish decision to indemnify Guidepost Solutions. Now, There are some Southern Baptists that are aware of this, but there are other Southern Baptists that are unaware of this. And so these are examples of what I consider to be, you can't undo some of that, right? But you have to make some decisions in the future that course correct based on some of what I consider to be unwise decisions that were made in the past. So I hope that is helpful in answering your question.
No, that was very helpful. I actually was not tracking that point on the indemnification of guideposts. I've certainly heard of a lot of other frustrations with guideposts, including their very public support for the LGBT agenda. It's interesting, Dr. Allen, that's an issue that's got a lot of legs amongst the rank and file Southern Baptists. A lot of pastors really, frustrated with that issue. And so that's, I think you're absolutely right. And really this, I'm not putting words in your mouth. These are my words, not yours, but really, I think it comes down to a lack of leadership, and, hence the name of our organization, Center for Baptist Leadership. Our goal is to help, cultivate courageous and uncompromising leadership for the Southern Baptist Convention in the 21st century, leaders who are willing to do the right thing, even when it is perhaps unpopular, particularly with the world, to be willing to withstand that blowback, whether it's in the New York Times or on CNN or what have you, and say, well, look, this is what the Bible teaches. This is what we believe. And this is how we're going to handle things as Southern Baptists. I'm encouraged to hear that you desire, I believe, to lead the Southern Baptist Convention like that, to stand strong on God's word with trust and transparency and, of course, telling the truth. So big issues coming up for us here in Indianapolis. Like you said, we have the law amendment, watershed moment. We'll have, I'm sure we'll have a battle back and forth on this effort for financial transparency. Obviously, we'll have cooperation group recommendations, things like that. What would your message be to Southern Baptists about the importance of coming to our annual meeting? It's less than 2 weeks away by the time people will be listening to this, but that's actually not too late. You can still register and come. And the power there, I like how you said mission control is God's word and mission control is our confession, but mission control is also the messengers. Sending that message up to the platform, so to speak, saying, hey, we need to go back in this direction. So what would you say to Southern Baptists listening to this if they're on the fence about coming to Indianapolis or not?
Yes. I understand it is costly financially to come to a Southern Baptist convention. If you're a pastor of a small church, and you don't have a budget within your budget, your church doesn't provide money for the convention, it's costly. You've got to, for 3 or 4 days, you've got to have your flight, your airfare, your hotel, meals, transportation. I recognize that is significant money, very costly. But the original conservative Baptist resurgence occurred. The resurgence occurred because grassroots Southern Baptist pastors and lay people made the decision that they were going to pay the price to win the victory. And that price, part of that price was financial. And they paid that price, even to the point of some of them sleeping in cars and eating sandwiches, for meals, in order to be able to be present and vote on critical issues that were facing the Southern Baptist Convention back in those days. We need that same kind of commitment. But also, we just need Southern Baptists to be involved. After all, it is your convention. The Southern Baptist Convention is the people, belongs to the people. The headquarters of the Southern Baptist Convention is every individual local church. The headquarters of the SBC is not Nashville. It's not Alpharetta. It's not anywhere else. The headquarters of the SBC is in the local church. And therefore, it's important every year that members of the local churches come to the SBC as messengers and take care of the Lord's business there. And I encourage all messengers to come to do that. Now, I also am aware that for those of you that are financially struggling about this decision and haven't made the decision to come yet, there are some ways which, William, I think you probably have more knowledge of than I do that will help them financially, maybe even the possibility of providing them a place to stay and that kind of thing that would cut that cost significantly. And I would encourage Southern Baptists to attend this convention. These issues of transparency, issues of the law amendment, the Law Sanchez Amendment, the election of a new president, these are critical issues. People need to come. They need to be prayed up. They need to come and be a part of this. It takes commitment, I recognize, but let me encourage all of my fellow Southern Baptists. If you're not currently planning to come, I know it's last minute, but it's not too late. Make the decision to come and be there, especially for these critical votes. Be in the room when these votes occur.
Yes, that's right. It's really important to be in the room as well. And we have some extended business hours for our time together this year, a later evening session on Tuesday than we usually have, right, and perhaps even some later time on Wednesday as well. It's very important for all Southern Baptist pastors and messengers to be there for the full 2 days, Tuesday and Wednesday. And Dr. Allen is right. We have, there, due to the generous work of a lot of local churches in Indianapolis, there is a list of free housing opportunities available for messengers, pastors coming to Indianapolis. That's something you're interested in, please reach out. We can get you the access to that list. You fill out a little form saying, who you are, where you're coming from, and how much you're looking for. And then you can see what opportunities are there. And that can take one of the biggest costs out of it, is to have the free housing.
Absolutely.
And Indianapolis is actually a fairly friendly driving distance for many Southern Baptists. There are a lot of Southern Baptists in Kentucky, Tennessee, North Carolina, et cetera. And those are, it's a long day's drive, but it's definitely doable. And it's doable. I agree with Dr. Allen on that wholeheartedly. Dr. Allen, what is your hope for the Southern Baptist Convention? I know that there are many who have, they have stepped out of it, or they're feeling frustrated. I think that many in leadership, my words, not yours, but I think many in leadership are certainly underestimating how many churches might leave if we don't get something like the law amendment right. They talk about how it might make some other churches that have the more egalitarian leanings leave if we do pass it, but I think they're greatly underestimating how many dedicated Bible-believing conservative Southern Baptists will walk away if they don't have the guarantee that we're going to stand strong on Scripture when it comes to who can be a pastor. So there is discontent, there's discouragement. Brother, what's your hope and your prayer, your positive vision for the Southern Baptist Convention going forward?
Well, my hope and prayer is that Southern Baptists would make decisions that would be wise decisions on these issues, that would foster our fidelity to Scripture, that would foster our fidelity to our doctrinal statement, the Baptist faith and message, that would allow us to cooperate together to do greater things than we've ever done. What does God want to do with the Southern Baptist Convention? A whole lot more than he's ever done before. I believe that. I believe there is a future for the SBC if we come together and make the right decisions and move forward in unity. And we need to make the main thing the main thing. Evangelism, missions, preaching, church planting. This is who we are. And we need to go, we need, some of us need to come back to that as a focus. That does not mean that we don't address the problems and the issues before us. But it does mean that we do not allow those problems or issues to distract us from the main thing, the main mission, the main message. This is my hope for the Southern Baptist Convention. This is what I want to contribute to happening, to help to happen if I'm elected president of the Southern Baptist Convention.
Well, thank you for that, Dr. Allen. And as we prepare to come to Indianapolis, why don't you let some folks know where they can find you there? I'm happy to announce that you'll be joining us at a Center for Baptist Leadership Tuesday lunch event alongside of Dr. Jared Moore and your good friend, Lewis Richardson, my good friend, Lewis Richardson, and John Whitehead. So thank you. So you'll be at our lunchtime event on Tuesday, June 11th. That's from 1:30 to 11:30 to 1:30. But you're doing some other events. I think you're doing a debate. Where can people find, or not a debate, I'm sorry, a friendly discussion. Where can folks find you leading up to the convention and at the convention?
Yes, well, I will be involved in the Baptist Review. I think on their Facebook group, they are providing an opportunity, a panel discussion for all of us. And I believe, if I recall, I think that's on Monday evening. I'll be involved with a group. I forget the name of it now. I'm sorry, but Sunday night, Sunday evening, I'll be a part of a panel there. But I will be available at other times during the convention. I will be, for example, at my booth. The Preaching Coach ministry will have a booth, and so in the booth area, people can come to the exhibit hall, and look me up at the Preaching Coach booth. I'll be there periodically. I will also be at the Mid-America Seminary booth, since I teach there. People can find me there. I will also be on Wednesday noon, from noon to 2. I'll be at the Mid-America Seminary luncheon, which is available if people register. They don't have to be a Mid-America graduate, but if they will just register to come, the alumni will be there, and I'll be there as well. People can come and be a part of that if they like. And so they can contact me that way. But between now and the convention, they can follow me on Twitter, formerly Twitter, X. And they can also go to my personal website, which is drdavidallen.org. And there's a convention section there. They can read all about what I consider to be issues and how I've articulated those issues. Or if they're just interested in Preaching Coach and what I do, they can go to PreachingCoach.com and check me out there and as well. So there are several ways people can get in touch with me, follow me, or connect with me at the Southern Baptist Convention.
Well, thank you for that. And let me try to just summarize briefly here if for folks as they walk away from this interview. Dr. David Allen running for the president of the Southern Baptist Convention. And Dr. Allen supports increased transparency, not just financial, but otherwise supports the motion being made by Rhett Burns to provide more financial transparency, wholeheartedly supports the law amendment, believes that it's a watershed issue, and also believes that our leaders need to, of course, address sexual abuse, but we need to stop calling it a crisis and being led in that direction. And you want us to keep the main thing, and get back to a prioritization of evangelism, church planting, gospel missions, and of course, theological education too, which you're a big part of as well.
Right.
Is that accurate, Dr. Allen? Is that a good summary?
William, that's about as accurate as I know how to make it. An excellent summary.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Allen, for joining us today on the Center for Baptist Leadership podcast. We look forward to having you at our lunch event. That's Tuesday, June 11th. And folks, make sure to follow Dr. Allen. Do you anticipate putting out any more blogs or position papers or things like that? I know you've published quite a bit, the promise, the perils, and, the other things. So anything else people should be looking for from you between now and the convention?
I might very well put out a 4-page document on the issue of sexual abuse and how we need to handle it, maybe how we need to address that. I am working on that now. I hope to be able to put something out about that. I'm not sure what else I will do. I am going to do probably another interview or two between now and then. Probably try to do that as well. But I don't know how much more will go on my website, though, between now and the convention, since we're technically less than 2 weeks away. But let me just close with this, William, if I may. Please. And I've used this analogy before, and I want to use it again here. When I was a young pastor in my first church, it was a new church plant. And we had the first 2 years, we really grew very well. In fact, in Dallas, Texas, proportionately, we were one of the fastest growing churches for those first 2 years, 1982 to 1984. We won awards for that through our Dallas Baptist Association. And I was so gung-ho about this church growing. Every Sunday, I want to have more people than we had last week. And I read a lot of the church growth books. I had several of them in my library. That was very popular at that time. And one of those books said to me that if I would go out on my parking lot count the number of cars on my parking lot, multiply by 2.3. That would tell me how many people were in Sunday school that day in my church. Well, you know what? I started doing that. During Sunday school, I would go out, count the cars, multiply by 2.3, and I would know a day in advance before Monday's count came out for Sunday school attendance. I was pretty much, that formula worked pretty much spot on. And I'm ashamed to tell you that I did that, William. I really am. But I want to tell you what broke me of that and how this relates to the SBC. Vance Havner was a great evangelist in those days before he passed away. And Vance Havner, I heard him say one time in a sermon, some of you preachers and pastors are more concerned about the absence of the people than the presence of the Lord. And that just got all over me, and God convicted me. And so, William, what I would say to all Southern Baptists who are listening to me, watching us today, here's what I would say. There is nothing wrong with the Southern Baptist Convention that the presence of the Lord and a return to the presence of the Lord cannot fix. And I believe that with all of my heart.
Well, amen, Dr. Allen. Thank you for preaching us out here today. I don't think there's much more I can add to that, but I'm thankful for you taking the time to be with us today and to speak to our listeners and to the Southern Baptists. And thank you for the service that you're doing and running, and your desire for change and your hope for a return to the presence of the Lord. It's been wonderful to have you, and we look forward to seeing you in Indianapolis.
Thank you so much, William. It's been a joy to be with you today, an honor to be invited to be a part of this time. And I appreciate it and appreciate you very much.
All right. Thank you.
The Center for Baptist Leadership podcast is powered by American Reformer, hosted by William Wolfe, with audio production by Jared Cummings. Our music is a custom remix of Soldiers of Christ in Truth Arrayed, the official hymn of Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. To help CBL reform and revitalize Christian institutions, please consider making a generous donation today at centerforbaptistleadership.org.